Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has criticized the UK's decision to suspend some arms sales to Israel, calling it shameful and misguided. In a series of strongly worded social media posts, Mr. Netanyahu says the partial ban will not impact his country's determination as it continues its war against Gaza. It comes as UK Defence Secretary John Healey announced the suspension of 30 out of 350 arms export licenses to Israel. According to Mr. Healey, this will not have a material impact on the country's security. The UK arms sales amount to 1% of Israeli defense imports, so the US remains the biggest arms supplier to Israel. Meanwhile, Mr. Netanyahu says he will define the end of the war in the Gaza Strip when Hamas fighters are no longer in control of Gaza. This he made known at a press conference in Jerusalem, where he also touched on a ceasefire deal proposed by the US, Qatar, and Egypt last month, emphasizing Israel agreed to the proposal and called for more international pressure on Hamas. His comments come after US President Joe Biden on Monday said the deal was very close, but criticized the Israeli Prime Minister for not doing enough, adding that the US was planning to present a final proposal to both Israel and Hamas this week.
I would define the end of the war in Gaza. When Hamas no longer rules Gaza. We throw them out. I would define the end of the war in World War II when the Nazis no longer rule Germany. To do that, you need to have a military victory, and you have to have also the political victory to destroy their governance. We're out to destroy the military capabilities of Hamas and the governing capabilities of Hamas, and we're well on our way to achieving both. That is total victory. I was asked whether I'm not doing enough to the release of hostages. Well, I want to set the record straight. On April 27th, Secretary of State Blinken said that Israel made an extraordinarily generous offer for a hostage deal. On May 31st, Israel agreed to a US-backed proposal. Hamas refused. On August 16th, Israel agreed to what the United States defined as a final bridging proposal. Hamas refused again. On August 19th, Secretary Blinken said, Israel accepted the US proposal. Now Hamas must do the same. On August 28th, that's 5 days ago, Deputy CIA Director said that Israel shows seriousness in the negotiations. Now Hamas must show the same seriousness.
Well, staying with the press conference, the Israeli Prime Minister is also insisting Israel controls the Philadelphia corridor, which is a narrow band along Gaza's border with Egypt. Israel believes Hamas smuggles weapons into Gaza backed by Iranian financing, a claim Hamas has denied. Mr. Netanyahu said in his words, as soon as we left the Philadelphia corridor, there was no barrier left to us against the massive introduction of weapons and means of warfare, and they are the ability to produce weapons and machines for digging tunnels, all under the auspices of Iran. The Prime Minister emphasized that the Philadelphia corridor will not be evacuated, indicating Gaza will become a terrorist hub if Israel backs down. The Philadelphia corridor has become a pivotal point of contention in the Hamas-Israel ongoing talks, as Israel insists on maintaining control over it. Meanwhile, Hamas and the mediators call for Israel's withdrawal to reach a ceasefire and exchange swap deal. The Philadelphia corridor, about 100 meters wide in places, is a demilitarized buffer zone running along the 13 kilometers on the Gaza-Egypt border. While saying in Israel, the hostages and missing families forums say more protests are planned to be held in several parts of the country, despite yesterday's court ruling. On Monday, thousands rallied outside the Prime Minister's residence, calling for an urgent deal to secure the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza. More scuffles broke out between the police and protesters who held placards with anti-Netanyahu messages. Some also set fire to the placards.
The main problem is not Philadelphia, not Rafah, and not even the war or the continuation of the war. The main problem is that our prime minister is in conflict of interest. As long as the war continues, Netanyahu knows that he stays in power in Israel and there are no elections, and his court is stopped due to the situation in Israel. And therefore, Netanyahu does his best to make the war last forever and not stop it.
So what happened right now that we were protesting against the war that's killing thousands of people from both sides. And what the CAP decided to do is to attack us, start hitting us, start yelling at us with their horses, with their machines, and they start telling us go away and pushing us away. And we were shouting, protesting legally against the war that's killing a lot of people, against this government that keep killing us, that keep shedding blood all over this place. This place is not holy anymore. And this CAP, what they decided to do is to hate us, to push us away, to shut us down.
We'll stay with protests, but this time in New York City. All the way in the United States, people calling for an end to the conflict between Israel and Hamas. They carried Palestinian flags, signs and banners as they marched through the city. The protests reportedly drew as many as 5,000 participants, but there were confrontations with counter-protesters carrying Israeli and American flags. Some scuffles between opposing groups were reported and a number of arrests were made.
I look at America like a bird, and a bird has two wings, and the two wings are the Democrats and the Republicans. Two wings of the same bird, and the bird has rabies at this point. So we're really at a point where the animal's kind of lost control of itself. So it's come to a point where we have to figure out, like, somebody like Kamala Harris, who's not doing what she's supposed to. She's not listening to her constituents. She's not listening to the Democratic Party. She's not listening to the uncommitted voters. She's doing what she wants, and honestly, it's a point where the Democrats and the Republicans are walking in lockstep at this point, and it makes me wonder what's the difference between the party other than a color and a couple of crazed politicians who basically say the same thing. So the party doesn't reflect me on either side. So, I'm hoping the uncommitted movement grows and that, America shifts towards a bigger party.
And those vaccinations, the polio vaccinations are ongoing for children in Gaza. Parents were seen queuing with their wards at the Deir al-Balah Health Center earlier. It comes after the enclave reported the first case of polio in 25 years last month, with an 11-month-old boy left paralyzed.
Given the numbers that we had yesterday, it's off to a very good start. We were thrilled that there were 87,000 vaccinated on the first day out of 156,000 that we are hoping to reach in the middle area. On Thursday, the vaccination campaign will move to the southern areas. It's very promising that already we have heard interest from parents who have come from Khan Yunis, who have come from the southern area, and are asking our staff there and asking our teams, when is the vaccination going to be available for us? When can we take our children? One of the biggest problems we're having, and one of the biggest challenges, is actually safely distributing the vaccination, because we have some areas in these so-called humanitarian pause zones, which means between the hours of 6 a.m. and 2 p.m. there needs to be no fighting and temporary ceasing in fighting. But outside of these zones, of course, and still in the middle area, we are still struggling to get access to facilities and access to families and children in those areas. It's far too dangerous for them to travel, to move. There is ongoing fighting. There was a lot of strikes this morning and through the night. So the fighting has not stopped by any means. There are some pauses throughout the day, but it's not guaranteed. We don't have guaranteed safety for people, and we really need that to reach all the children to get that 90% success rate. The one thing I noticed yesterday was, going an hour without hearing a bomb. You notice that. Going an hour without hearing a strike, it really was noticeable that there was a calmer and quieter day yesterday, because it has been so relentless for the last few weeks, and also so many evacuation orders, 16 evacuation orders in August alone, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people and families being forced to flee. We had the first rain yesterday afternoon. it was a pretty torrential downpour for the best part of an hour. And it's just huge warning for what winter will bring. The sewage water was flooding the streets. Everybody here sleeping on the floor. The shelters aren't waterproof.
We have the VOA's Ricky Rawson in Tel Aviv for us. Ricky, great to see you. Now, this decision by the UK Defence Secretary to suspend the arms licenses to Israel, it was quite unexpected. The Prime Minister says suspending 30 arms licenses will not impact, though, on the Israeli military. How true is this?
Well, they say that only 30 out of the 350 arms licenses, export licenses, which the British defense minister has now blocked. The defense minister of the UK said that it won't threaten Israeli defense capabilities. And in fact, they will continue to supply parts, components for the F-35 fighter jets, which are used to drop the 2,000-pound bombs that most of the world objects to the Israelis using as part of their military strategy.
So does the Prime Minister fear that allies could toe the line of Britain?
Well, already many countries have enacted bans on arms sales to Israel, including Italy and Spain and the Netherlands and Canada. Belgium has called for all of the EU countries to ban arms sales. And right now, it's mostly the US, Germany, and Denmark that are continuing to provide weapons.
That must be music to the ears of pro-Palestinian supporters, but I'm wondering, it calls for a deeper assessment of where and how, these weapons and the military donations being made to Israel are going. Are there some Israeli government ministers who probably see things this way? They question the idea of use of the weapons and the fact that they may, be in violation of international laws.
There may be those points of views on the part of opposition members in the Israeli political scene, in the Israeli parliament. But right now, the coalition parties in the Israeli government have continued to support the Prime Minister's point of view that the current strategy of how to fight the war in Gaza must continue. With the airstrikes against Hamas targets. And it's apparent that none of these parties want to challenge this policy because they don't want the government to fall. And in new elections, they would certainly lose their power. And it's striking that the only opposition within the government is coming from the defense minister, who maintains that it would be possible to have a ceasefire in order to save the hostages.
It's going to be hard for the Israeli Prime Minister to keep defending where these weapons are being used and also to defend Israel's position. And that's because, the ceasefire deal that was supposed to have been agreed by now is still on the table. And that's because he's added another clause to this. Where are we, with the negotiations? I know that currently there doesn't seem to be anything happening because of what's been going on, Israel's incursion into the West Bank and other issues.
Well, there's a rumor that the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar are going to put a take it or leave it deal on the table within the week. But it's unclear and anybody's guess what the terms would be in this deal and whether what the Hamas response would be. But Netanyahu made it clear, as you saw in the last night's press conference, that he insists that the Israeli army maintain a presence on the Philadelphia corridor. And he admitted that he understands that this presence, this military strategy might be, which would be a non-starter for Hamas, might cause the deal not to go through and the hostage release would not happen.
Isn't that stalling the deal, Ricky? Adding the Philadelphia corridor clause into it.
It absolutely is. And this is in the face of all of the heads of the Israeli security establishment, including the defense minister, as I noted, and the chief of staff of the army, and all the heads of the military intelligence services, who have all said that, in fact, the presence on the Philadelphia corridor is not essential, as Netanyahu maintains that Israel could always go back there if Hamas violated the agreement for the ceasefire and the hostage release, and that this is something that Netanyahu has added because of his own political considerations and personal considerations rather than a true military need, as he stated there was.
Let's talk about the protests that are still ongoing, in Israel. They began yesterday, despite the court order calling for an end. So the court order called for an end to the strike, but not an end to the protests. So the protests are ongoing. And I know that the Israeli government, just wondering exactly how they're trying to convince people to get off the streets and to think that the prime minister is doing, everything possible to get this hostage deal and to put Israel in a better position at the end of the war.
People are not going to be convinced of that. The protests have been huge, especially since people learned of the murder of 6 young hostages in Hamas captivity just days ago. They had survived almost 11 months, and now they're being killed. And people see, no matter what the government's argument might be, that a military solution is the only way to free the hostages, that in fact 11 months of fighting has done nothing to release them, has only resulted in more and more hostages being killed. And the protests are continuing, but I think people realize that there's a limit to the power of the public out on the streets, and that any kind of real change will depend on politicians in the Israeli parliament, both from the opposition and maybe a few members of the ruling Likud party coming to oppose what Prime Minister Netanyahu and his allies in the government continue to do with the war and in opposition to a ceasefire hostage release deal.
Well, hopefully they're careful with the protesters and with the arrests and so on. Ricky, thanks again for keeping us updated.
Thank you.